So the introduction Daniel gave was actually very interesting, and I think I wanted to talk to you about this nice situation at the GABA event where you first talked about your product as well. What I think it's interesting that nowadays we have the other problem. So nowadays we have Germans coming to Silicon Valley basically every second week. We have like major tours, we have founders, we have big companies coming to Silicon Valley. I would say we almost have a Silicon Valley tourism. So I was wondering how your experience with this is, and what do you think this Silicon Valley tourist should take back to Germany?
Yes, I mean, I think partly it's driven by the weather. Since the weather is so much nicer here, but there's definitely been an uptick, and you almost always hear that they want to catch the spirit of Silicon Valley, as if they can put it into their suitcase and bring it back. And you've probably heard that, the spirit of Silicon Valley. And I think it's hard to capture the spirit. And but I think it depends what people, why they come and what they can take back, if they can take something concretely back into it. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm on the agenda and I try to, often my precondition is that they come on a walk with me, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And but I try to be helpful, and I don't always know what happens. You know, does it change something? That's sometimes frustrating when you don't see them coming back. But I sometimes hear that you know, that something, you know, is changing, and so I think it really depends.
So talking about another thing people say about Silicon Valley, which is basically a community with many geniuses. I mean, Hartmut Esslinger met one of them, Steve Jobs obviously was one of them, and we have like other geniuses today, like Mark Zuckerberg, for example. So people tend to talk about these entrepreneurs as if they were like something very special. And you know, since you are part, because you are a very successful entrepreneur and you're also a very successful advisor, as part of VC firm Early Bird, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this attitude and whether it's good for the community to talk in terms of geniuses about their entrepreneurs or not.
I think there are definitely some people who are technical geniuses, and there are breakthroughs that happen on the technical level. But I think the things that often change society are when people bring together a mix of when they look at opportunities that are in technology, but people who also have a good sense of what's happening in society, with a good sense of psychology and sociology and a good sort of business sense. And so I think the people who often have made these changes, like Bill Gates or somebody, you know, they are smart technically, but they also have a good business sense, and the pure technical geniuses are not always the ones who are making the big breakthroughs and end up making the big change. Like Steve Wozniak was maybe the technical genius, but they're not in the end the change makers.
It's just really interesting because, I mean, I live in Silicon Valley for over 3 years now. You've been here much longer. And what I experienced and what I found most interesting about this community is that it's basically a lot of hard work, right? It's like a lot of getting up early, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of failure, and it's a lot of, you know, it's a very hard fight, actually. So do you think it's really helpful to, you know, to talk about Silicon Valley as if it was like kind of a fairy tale?
Yes, I think that happens in Germany when people go on the tours. I mean, if entrepreneurs come on the tours, sometimes they find that in Germany they have difficulty raising money. And they say, well, there's not enough money. And then they read these articles about how companies in Silicon Valley are getting a lot of funding, and they imagine coming here and it's just raining money. And they can just go and open their suitcase and come back with a bunch of money.
So it's not as easy, you want to say.
It's not so easy because there's the issue of trust, because people here, they do, there is a lot of money available, but they often look at, well, can we trust this person? And the criteria of the VCs, it's based on the person. And so they look at, well, has someone worked with this person before? And who are your customers? And then when the German entrepreneurs come over, there's, well, we don't know anybody that knows you. And your customers are this German company in Sindelfingen. We don't know this company in Sindelfingen.
Everybody knows Sindelfingen, don't they?
So they often are not getting the funding, and then they're very disappointed. And you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is pretty hard work, and the 40-hour work week, doesn't quite work.
Yeah, talk a little bit.
So talk a little bit about how it all started. I mean, I think everybody is pretty interested in how you actually, you started the company. It was a lot of hard work, and right now LinkedIn was sold to, in 2016, it was sold to Microsoft, big success, a big exit for you and for other members of the board as well. So talk a little bit about the hard times. Talk a little bit about failure. Talk a little bit about the things that went wrong, because I think we all have a wrong picture of what's going on in Silicon Valley. I think you know a lot of this kind of stuff. That's what's really happening. Talk about reality.
LinkedIn specifically, or my career in general? I can talk about lots of things that were hard.
Talk about LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, with LinkedIn, I think when people look at it now, often people tell me, it's like, yeah, LinkedIn made so much sense. It was just obvious that it was going to be successful. And I always think, where were you in 2003? Because nobody was telling me that then. Even my friends were kind of giving me this advice and were saying, are you sure? This doesn't really make a lot of sense, and you should really do this. And I think what they're trying to tell me is, maybe you should do something else, because really, we don't want you to waste 4 years of your time, of your life on this. And they meant it well, right? They wanted me to not waste my time, and they thought this wasn't really going to work well. So, in retrospect, it seems to make sense, but at the time, it didn't really make a lot of sense. And I can't really fault them for it, because, picture this. So this is late 2002, when we were working on creating the site, and there was already a very successful social networking company out there called Friendster. I don't know how many of you remember Friendster, and I'll find out who's really old. And Friendster had 4 million members, and it was fun, and you had, when you joined, good things were happening right away. Well, contrast then with what you do on LinkedIn. Is there anything fun that happens when you join LinkedIn? No. You put in your resume. There's nothing fun about that. And even it's kind of why, it's uncomfortable, because until then people weren't doing that, right? Your resume was something private. And then nothing good happens after that. And there were already other business networking sites out there, like Rise, and they hadn't been particularly successful. So it really didn't make a lot of sense for us to start this company. And then there was the question of how we're going to make money, because it wasn't engaging. The social networking sites like Friendster were very engaging. So they were going to make money with ads, which was a proven business model. And we were saying, well, we're going to have premium features, and people are going to pay us money. And back in 2003, the Wall Street Journal had just given up on their premium subscriptions because nobody was paying for it. And it's like, okay, the Wall Street Journal can't make premium features work. And you little company, that people have been failing with business networking sites. And even if you were successful, Friendster would just add a little thing to that profile where you can enter where you worked and when. You're going to charge them premium features, and you'll be successful where Wall Street Journal wasn't. Tell me again why you have a right to exist. I mean, So that's not obvious that you're going to be successful.
You told me earlier that you come from a very modest background, so your parents are both teachers in a small town next to Hamburg, Zeven. So how did you explain your parents what you did back then?
Not a lot, because I think it would just worry them. But they're kind of used to it, because I also didn't really have a steady job beforehand, so it was just kind of, they were already kind of used to me not doing anything particularly steady. I was consulting before, so it was just one of my many projects. So they're it just kind of flew under the radar for a while. It's just like one of my many projects that I was doing. So, and I don't think it made any sense to them. I mean, as a Beamte, you know, because it's just not really that made a lot of sense to them. So, but eventually, at some point, I tried to explain it to them, but they're not really into this kind of thing. But it actually helped, like, you journalists, you know, like when they see an article where a journalist, a German journalist, because I mean the German press was kind of interested because there's not that many successful German companies.
I remember we did the first interview, I think six years ago or so, hiking up.
We did the first interview hiking together 6 years ago, I guess, and everybody was pretty interested, you know, in learning more about LinkedIn. And I know from back in the days you had a car that actually had a sign called LinkedIn on the car. Do you still have this car?
Not the same car, although I had it for quite a while, but because we also had a German competitor, and so there was always interest from the German media, and so I always asked the journalists for a link to the article because I could send it to my parents.
That's actually very sweet. So talking about money in Silicon Valley and money on the streets, I guess we are looking into a very interesting year. 2018 will be the year where many IPOs are about to happen. So much money, like Dropbox obviously announced it. Everybody's expecting it from Airbnb. Uber might go IPO. We don't really know when. Lyft is another candidate. So people tend to think there's a lot of money on the streets, basically. If you just walk around as a founder collecting everything, is it really true? First question. And second question, what's a good advice for an advisor, for an entrepreneur who comes to Silicon Valley and who wants to be part of the ecosystem and wants to actually convince a VC to invest in his company, her company?
I think the first thing is you have to think of what does a US investor want. So just saying, hey, I'm German, you know, they don't care if you're German or not. You need to think about how do they look at investments. And so for the most part, you want to look just like a US company, because anything that's different is probably like going to look like a disadvantage. So the companies that have the easiest time is if they're set up as a US corporation, like a Delaware corporation as the mother company, and then the subsidiaries in the US, because that's just a lot easier for them to deal with. So just anything that's different is just an extra hurdle. But then look at, are there any strategic advantages that you have, not just because you're German, but for example, I think one of the things that's well known among investors in the US is that it's so difficult to have talent, right? Development talent, war is just so tough in Silicon Valley. It's so tough to recruit people. And there, being German would be just even more difficult. Without having your network here, how are you going to recruit these top engineers when they all have Dropbox and Airbnb and someone with their Stanford and Berkeley buddies competing to recruit? Well, it is actually a lot easier to recruit great engineers in Germany, where you don't have so much competition and you have pretty talented software engineers, and some of the VCs here are savvy enough to know that. So you can actually sell that as a competitive advantage that you have. And often you can have teams of engineers who've already worked together for 5 or 10 years, which is hard to get in Silicon Valley because everybody moves around after 2 years to the next job. So I think there are ways to position yourself, but you want to make it that you don't look odd, that the VC has to explain it to their other general partners, and think about what is your advantage, your competitive advantage versus all the other investment opportunities.
That's really interesting because we see like many VCs from the US actually investing in German companies. I mean, Peter Thiel is one of them who's like big in fintech. Andy von Berchtoldsheim, who is obviously known to this audience as well, invested in German companies. On the other hand, I see many German entrepreneurs moving to Silicon Valley. I mean, you are one example. You came when you started studying in Stanford. I know other entrepreneurs who started their company in Germany and then decided to go to the US because they didn't see any future for their company in Germany. And I know there are many reasons. It's the money, it's the ecosystem, it's the talent. Why are we still talking about that? Why are we still talking about these challenges, and why is nothing really changing?
Yeah, so as you know, I was a partner at Early Bird, which is one of the premier VCs who focuses on the Series A in Germany, which is very important because Germany actually has a lot of investment for angels now, which wasn't true 10 or 20 years ago. It was a real struggle to get seed investors. Because the seed investors you had were mostly kind of lawyers or dentists or, now you have a lot of the people who started e-commerce companies are now angel investors. So you actually have helpful angels available. You have the government funds that help with it. So seed money, I would say, is not a big problem in Germany. But at a Series A, there's still not a lot. But Early Bird is one of the funds that's available. And at the later stage, you still have not a lot of options for like a big round to raise. $20 million round is still a struggle. But if you can at least get the Series A, that's great. But I wanted to learn, because I read always, like, why is there no new SAP? And I wanted to kind of understand it for myself, to get a sense, because I was German, I was curious about it, and I was like, unless I really meet a lot of entrepreneurs and really immerse myself, I won't really know. So my conclusion is, and often people have said, well, the Germans are just not entrepreneurial enough, or they don't take enough risk, or they don't learn from failure, or it's this or that, it's the labor laws, or there's all kinds of explanations that...
Do you think it's an excuse?
Do you think it's an excuse even?
Well, I think none of those reasons are true that are given. Yeah. It's not the entrepreneurs. I think there are plenty of good entrepreneurs who are just as good as in the US. I don't think it's the labor laws. I don't think it's the capital. I think it's the Germans themselves.
So it's you, basically. A lot of
Well, not what's in here. Because Germans are reluctant to adopt these new products in the IT space, the new software products. And I saw that with e-commerce, because I was in the internet space then, and when people were doing e-commerce, Germans were very hesitant. They're like, what? To enter my credit card on this website? Like, so many things can go wrong. Like, that would be a stupid idea. And while people were doing it in Scandinavia, in the UK, in Asia, in other places, Germans, and journalists too, journalists were feeding that. They're like,
journalists are the worst,
yes, journalists are the worst.
Of course.
I mean, you can write lots of articles and sell lots of things saying like why it's a bad idea to do that, right? So Germans were just very hesitant to adopt e-commerce. And so if you're an entrepreneur in Germany trying to start an e-commerce company, and that is your first market, guess what? You're going to have a hard time. Same thing with social media. When Friendster was sweeping the US, when Friendster was sweeping especially Southeast Asia, guess what? Nobody in Germany was joining Friendster. The next wave of social networking was MySpace. It was sweeping UK, it was sweeping Spain, it was sweeping Scandinavia. Germany, nobody was joining MySpace because it's scary. Putting a profile, like it's creepy. Like why would you do that? And security and SSL and privacy, and it would be bad. It's only in the third wave with SchülerVZ did finally Germans join social networking. And so as an entrepreneur, having Germany as your first market is really tough because it's a market of late adopters. And how are we going to start a company in this market that is a late adopter? So, I mean, you could start a company there, just don't try to market your product in your own country. Just market it somewhere else, where people are ready to just embrace new products. So this is, I think, so I mean, you could say it's a problem of the entrepreneurs because they simply need to pick a different market. Market it to people in Scandinavia, market it to people in Korea, where people love, and people in Southeast Asia, they love new products. They don't care about privacy or spam. They just try out the new stuff because they want to see the new things. Whereas Germans find the fault in it. They find what's wrong with it first.
Before we come to all the questions from the audience, I think there's a lot of engagement in the audience, so I'm looking forward to have your questions later. I want to talk, I want to challenge that a little bit. Because I think, I'm here for 3 years now and I see so many hypes going on. Right now we are obviously in the Bitcoin blockchain hype, right? And then we're in the Snapchat hype. So I think I'm totally with you agreeing on this hesitant attitude, and I'm also agreeing with you on journalists being like destroying basically everything, writing everything, into the ground. And on the other side, I think it's like really interesting right now that we are in a discussion around, technology and how about the negative side of technology as well, right? And I think it's basically driven by what's happening in Europe, by the European Commission, for example. All this discussion is around trust in social networks, antitrust, lawsuits in Europe. Basically, what I see, and I was really interested in, learning your opinion about this, is that the US is kind of catching up on that. When you talk to people in Washington these days, everybody is like looking to Europe and saying, wow, that's really interesting. They really did something. They really did this lawsuit. Man, I wish I could do that. So I was wondering, to just, end this discussion and open it to the public, whether the US can't learn anything from Europe. I think there might be some things.
I think it is risky when politicians get involved. Because politicians tend to want to get voted for office, and so often they don't understand really like how these things work very well. And so they tend to do whatever helps them get elected. And so I think when you get the laws that get passed, like in Germany we just have this Löschungsgesetz, right, that just got passed.
You have to explain it to the American public what this means. Actually, nobody really knows.
Yeah, and I'm not the expert at it, but I was just in Germany, and it's like if you say something bad about somebody, then like Facebook and Twitter have to delete it. And it's well-intentioned, but even the guy who created it, I don't know, he said this other politician's an idiot, and then people wondering why that tweet had to be deleted. It just becomes kind of difficult to enforce these things, so I'm not sure where you draw the line. It's like Facebook says, it's complicated.
I think that's a perfect way to open the discussion. Your questions from the audience, please. Can be very simple. What's next with technology? Yeah.
I have to admit I'm an Austrian, but it resonates well what you said about the Germans. When you're talking about the kind of disadvantage in Germany, talking about Silicon Valley, we had the discussion here at our table, how do you judge the viability of Silicon Valley in regards to being an epicenter of technology? If you look at, yes, China, but even Germany, you see a lot of incubators, a lot of acceleration, a lot of venture capital coming up there. In 10 years or 5 years from now, will Silicon Valley be still like one of the centers of innovation of the world?
Yeah, I think it will still be one of the sectors. Not sure if it'll be like as dominant as now. That's hard to predict. I would like to see. It would sort of make sense to it to be more distributed because there are smart people certainly everywhere. But there are sort of certain network effects. So how exactly it's going to play out, I don't really know. But I definitely think Silicon Valley, you know, because of the network effects are very powerful, and I still continue to see people moving here from other parts of the US, from Europe, so I think that will continue.
What's next for LinkedIn?
I don't know, I mean, I've left a long time ago, so I'm not sure I know, but I would say, I guess I could say what I would like. And I think this is a general trend, what I would like of all software. I feel we have, with software, we have been creating software that does something, you know, we type and it does something somewhere else and we live our life. And they're kind of these two separate worlds. And I think that's not so good. I think what we need is kind of an online to offline conversion. So that this software, that we live our life, and that this, that the software helps us in our life right now. That's not like something that distracts us from our real life. That it helps us right now. And it's not easy. That doesn't distract us, right? Because right now it's this, I just saw last night this cartoon. You know those dogs that have like these cones around them? Yeah. And there was this cartoon of this guy at a party and had a cone around him. And he was saying, I have to wear it so I don't look at my smartphone every 2 minutes. And because that's what our software is doing. It's distracting us from our world. And I think what it should be doing is it should be helping us in our world. But what it needs to be a lot smarter. So it tracks what we're doing and gives us just the right information. So what that means is really augmented reality. So that we don't have a separate device that we need to pull out. Because that pulls us away from our existing world, right? That needs the cone. So it needs something that's always there, that knows what we're doing, and gives us just the one piece of information that we need at the right time. So when I'm meeting one of you here at the event, it tells me the one piece of information that's going to be useful. Like LinkedIn, when you're asking me, it shows you what's the most important connection that you and I have. That, the most salient shared connection on LinkedIn that we have that will help our conversation. And it should provide that.
Somebody audience just said scary. You said scary. He thinks it's scary. Probably German. Is this a typical German angst, or is it like should we be scared, or are they?
I don't know. I mean, I think it would be good because it would help the conversation. I mean, I find Facebook useful for that perspective because without Facebook, I meet people and we have to discover. Like, I mean, these are like friends like at school, and we just sort of waste a bunch of small talk time to figure out something like what we did this weekend. But with Facebook, I'm already informed. I know they went on this camping trip. And we can go right into it. And they're like, oh, you went on this camping trip. And, it's just like it gets the conversation rolling. And it makes it better.
But I've heard that your daughter is not allowed to use a phone, right?
She can use a phone. She's just not Snapchat yet. I know, she's not happy with that.
Instagram or Twitter.
Or Instagram or Twitter, she's correcting me.
Okay, I'll ask another question over there.
I like what you said about connecting worlds, because that's literally what we do. We built the first robot that connects the cyber world to the real physical world. But my question is actually, being here in the Bay Area, we're from Munich originally, I'm from Munich. And we have Google here, we have Facebook, and all these other, Uber, Twitter, all these huge mega companies. And we have so much IP created in Germany. What prevents German companies to arise like Uber, like Twitter, like all these companies?
I think it is kind of what I was saying earlier, that when you create a product, I think there is, the right people are in Germany. I think we have the entrepreneurs, I think we have the money. But I think when you market the products in Germany, it's often not a very receptive audience in the early stages. So my advice is often to the entrepreneurs to not market it first in Germany, but to market it elsewhere. Because you need to market your product wherever your customers are most receptive first. And there may be certain markets where Germany are early adopters. Maybe in some green technologies, maybe in certain car markets, maybe the Germans are the early adopters. But I think in a lot of the sort of software realm, and even same B2B, at Early Bird, when we're looking at SaaS companies, the ones that were getting traction, we found that most of their early customers were in the US, because the German businesses were just not trusting that their data was in the cloud. They wanted the data to be right in their companies. And also with business, when there's business software, so this is not just about German consumers, this is about German businesses as well. When there's a new business, let's say some kind of new data tool, often you find there's also industries in the US where they are careful about adopting new technologies, but you find, for example, high-tech companies, when they see new tools available, they will look at the opportunities of using something to become more efficient and do away with things. And those are often the early adopter industries for new tools. And that helps business-to-business startups as a new market. They often target high-tech companies as their first market, and maybe Wall Street. They don't target the telco industries, which are more late adopters. But when you try to sell these things to German companies, what I've heard from many entrepreneurs is not only there's general procedural issues with it has to be on our approved software list, and our committee only meets this many times, and with these approved vendors, and it's an annual cycle, and those things. But they also find, it has to be, we have this custom-written software, and it's, it's not, you don't have a special driver for this software, and you don't have a special interface with this, and until you have done all these special things, it's just not going to work for us. So they look at all the reasons why they're not going to buy it. They look at all the requirements and not so much at the opportunity how they can make their business more effective. And so they just delay buying it. And often I've heard also stories from German entrepreneurs after they sold it to their customers in the US and was being adopted in the US. Then 2 years later, the German customers were really eager to buy it. Look at, you have a very impressive customer list. We want to buy it now too. So it is much better to market it maybe somewhere else. So I think that's the reason. If you're starting Twitter in Germany, don't try to convince Germans to tweet. Go to Korea. Get Korean kids to tweet. And then eventually the Germans will tweet too.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your time.